The sight is burned into my mind. My daughter shivering by the dark French doors clutching a threadbare doll, while through the glass, his whole family was laughing, bathed in the golden warmth of the fireplace. "What are you doing out here, honey?" Her tiny voice choked with cold, whispered. "They told me to wait." That was the precise moment I realized I wasn't just losing my son. I was losing my granddaughter to their sheer calculated cruelty. My name is Margaret Dubois, and I am 58 years old, a retired high school principal living in the outskirts of Vermont. I am a woman who values order, tradition, and above all, fiercely protects her family. My life has been one of rigorous adherence to standards, both in education and at home. Losing my husband 5 years ago left a hole, but I filled it by focusing on my role as the matriarch, especially to my son Ethan. Ethan is 32, a successful architect, and for years he was my pride. He married Clara 3 years ago. Clara is complex. She comes from an old-moneyed New England family, the Kindreds, who are wealthy, established, and intensely clannish. They operate on unspoken rules and subtle condescension, believing their status gives them superiority. The relationship I have with the Kindreds is purely transactional, centered on their granddaughter Lily, who is my daughter Clara's child from a previous marriage. Yes, Lily is my step-granddaughter, but in my heart she is simply my granddaughter. She is 5 years old, bright, sensitive, and completely adored by me. Ethan, my son, legally adopted her, making her family in every sense. We were always close, but the dynamic shifted drastically after the Kindreds decided that Christmas should always be hosted at their sprawling estate. My role was reduced from loving grandmother to an uneasy guest tolerated only because of Lily. The day I found Lily outside was the culmination of months of subtle, suffocating disrespect, and the day I stopped being Margaret Dubois, the polite guest, and became Margaret Dubois, the fierce defender. My deep-seated need to protect Lily and my quickness to recognize cruelty stems from my own difficult past. Growing up, I was often the outsider. My mother remarried a man who had 2 children of his own, and I became the other child, the one tolerated, but never truly belonging. I learned what it felt like to stand by the periphery, watching others enjoy warmth and acceptance. This has instilled in me a lifelong, agonizing fear of seeing anyone, especially a child, feel marginalized or excluded. This history makes me intensely sensitive to subtle forms of rejection. I don't fear a loud confrontation. I fear the quiet, calculated acts of exclusion that tear a person down from the inside. When the Kindreds use their soft voices and perfect manners to deliver a snub, it registers immediately as a flashback to my stepfamily's cold indifference. My internal alarm bells ring whenever I detect a hierarchical dynamic where one person is clearly made to feel less than. Physically, this vulnerability manifests subtly. I have a controlled upright posture, a professional habit from my principal days. But when I'm anxious or sensing tension, my face becomes exceptionally still, almost mask-like, as I try to process every detail. My eyes are constantly scanning the room, not for danger, but for cues, looking for who is being ignored, who is being favored. I have a habit of touching my gold locket, a nervous tick, whenever I feel my control slipping. The sight of Lily outside, however, triggered a different reaction. The cold, heartbreaking image of her small body curled up by the door, trying to get warm, shattered my usual composure. My hands didn't clench. They opened, ready to gather her. My heart physically ached, a sharp, visceral pain. The cold on her little face and the tremor in her body were not just physical facts. They were a confirmation of my deepest fear that the people who were supposed to cherish her were deliberately making her feel the chill of being unwanted. In that moment, the years of quiet fear transformed into protective fury. My deep-seated need to protect Lily and my quickness to recognize cruelty stems from my own difficult past. Growing up, I was often the outsider. My mother remarried a man who had 2 children of his own, and I became the other child, the one tolerated, but never truly belonging. I learned what it felt like to stand by the periphery, watching others enjoy warmth and acceptance. This has instilled in me a lifelong agonizing fear of seeing anyone, especially a child, feel marginalized or excluded. This history makes me intensely sensitive to subtle forms of rejection. I don't fear a loud confrontation. I fear the quiet, calculated acts of exclusion that tear a person down from the inside. When the kindreds use their soft voices and perfect manners to deliver a snub, it registers immediately as a flashback to my stepfamily's cold indifference. My internal alarm bells ring whenever I detect a hierarchical dynamic where one person is clearly made to feel less than. Physically, this vulnerability manifests subtly. I have a controlled, upright posture, a professional habit from my principal days. But when I'm anxious or sensing tension, my face becomes exceptionally still, almost mask-like, as I try to process every detail. My eyes are constantly scanning the room, not for danger but for cues, looking for who is being ignored, who is being favored. I have a habit of touching my gold locket, a nervous tic, whenever I feel my control slipping. The sight of Lily outside, however, triggered a different reaction. The cold, heartbreaking image of her small body curled up by the door, trying to get warm, shattered my usual composure. My hands didn't clench. They opened ready to gather her. My heart physically ached, a sharp, visceral pain. The cold on her little face and the tremor in her body were not just physical facts. They were a confirmation of my deepest fear, that the people who were supposed to cherish her were deliberately making her feel the chill of being unwanted. In that moment, the years of quiet fear transformed into protective fury. The relationship dynamic, specifically the one centered around Christmas gatherings at the Kindred estate, was defined by a veneer of sophisticated yet utterly exhausting politeness. It was a brittle truce, maintained by the sheer force of tradition and my desperate desire for Lily to have a normal family Christmas. The emotional atmosphere at the Kindred's home, a vast imposing house filled with historical art and cold marble, was always one of the calculated cheerfulness. Everything was perfectly staged. Clara's mother, Evelyn Kindred, presided over the gathering with a brittle smile and eyes that constantly judged. She would greet me with an over-the-top, "Margaret, darling, so glad you could join our little tradition," placing subtle emphasis on our and little, immediately signaling my peripheral status. I in turn would respond with equally controlled gentleness and warmth, desperately trying to project confidence. My face would hold a ready, slightly strained smile. I would bring a homemade complex dish, which Evelyn would politely compliment before setting it aside, preferring her caterer's fare. My focus was always on Lily, and this was where the dynamic appeared most lighthearted on the surface. Lily adored the big Christmas tree and the lights. We would sit together, her small hands in mine, decorating cookies in a corner of the enormous kitchen. Ethan, my son, would oscillate between joining us and trying to impress the Kindred men with professional talk, his own anxiety evident in his stiff body language. The feelings were consistently shallow and performative. We were all acting. Clara would occasionally give me a light, air-kissed greeting. The conversation was always safe investments, European travel, or the children's latest achievements, but never real. There was a constant, subtle psychological pressure. For example, my gifts to Lily, always thoughtful, often educational, were gently dismissed, while the Kindred's extravagant, expensive toys were showcased. My eyes would often catch a fleeting look between Clara and Evelyn, a silent communication of shared amusement or disdain, which always gave me a chill, despite the forced vui-vie happiness of the holiday music. I tolerated this environment because Lily was there. I believed that by maintaining my composure and continuing to offer my steady, quiet love, I could carve out a space for both Lily and myself. I confused their outward politeness with genuine acceptance, desperately clinging to the hope that this carefully constructed peace was sustainable. I was living in a beautiful cold glass house, oblivious to the fact that the subtle exclusion was specifically designed to make me feel unnecessary and uncomfortable, isolating me before the eventual conflict. Yeah, the meticulous facade of Christmas cheer shattered late on Christmas Eve. The Kindreds traditionally opened their main gifts before midnight, a ritual that served mostly to showcase their wealth. The tension started building around Lily's gifts. I had spent weeks crafting a detailed, hand-sewn historical dollhouse, a labor of love that reflected her interest in history. The Kindreds, led by Evelyn, bought her an electric mini car that took up half the parlor. When Lily opened my dollhouse, her face lit up with genuine delight. "Oh, Grandma Margaret, it's so beautiful," she exclaimed, her little hands gently touching the lace curtains I had stitched. Evelyn Kindred immediately swooped in, her voice pitched high with false sweetness. "Oh, how lovely, Margaret. So quaint. But darling, look." She then dramatically unveiled the electric car. "This is a gift for a big girl. We'll put the dollhouse up in the attic with the other old things for now, shall we? You need space for your new car?" Lily's expression crumbled instantly. The light in her eyes faded and she looked from the dollhouse, still clutched in her hand, to the imposing electric car, then up at me with a look of confused betrayal. Ethan, my son, noticed the tension, and instead of supporting me, offered a weak, nervous laugh. "Yeah, Mom, maybe put that away for safety, okay?" His body language was hunched, clearly signaling deference to his in-laws. I felt a familiar sharp pang of dismissal, but I kept my face composed. "Of course, Evelyn. Whatever Lily prefers," I murmured, internalizing the insult. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the dollhouse, feeling like I was cradling my rejected love. The final act of cruelty happened an hour later. The whole Kindred clan, about 15 people, were settled by the massive stone fireplace, sipping hot cider and laughing loudly at one of Clara's father's dull anecdotes. The air was thick with their self-congratulation and the warm smell of pine and nutmeg. I noticed Lily was gone. I asked Clara, "Where's Lily?" Clara, looking bored, waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, she got a bit hyper after the hot chocolate. Ethan told her to go wait by the French doors until she calmed down. We don't want her disturbing the flow, Margaret." French doors. I knew exactly where those were, on the far, unheated sun porch, right next to the massive, drafty panes of glass leading outside. I walked quickly, my body moving with a sudden, urgent purpose. There she was, curled up against the cold glass, her small body shivering uncontrollably. She was wearing only a thin sweater, clutching the threadbare doll she always carried. The porch was dark and icy. I crouched down, my hands immediately reaching for her cold skin. "What are you doing out here, honey?" I asked, my voice choked with disbelief. Her little face was pale and her lips were faintly blue. She whispered, "Grandpa told me I was being too loud about the dollhouse. Ethan said I had to wait here until the laughter stopped. But they keep laughing, Grandma Margaret." Through the glass, I could see them clearly. Ethan, my son, was leaning against the mantelpiece, a self-satisfied smile on his face as he listened to a joke. Clara and Evelyn were roaring with laughter, completely oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the freezing child just a few feet away. In that single devastating moment, the polite facade evaporated. My emotion was not just anger. It was a white-hot protective rage. They hadn't just slighted me. They had deliberately used an innocent freezing child as collateral damage in their cruel game of hierarchy. This wasn't about status. This was emotional abuse. My relationship with my son, my role in this family, everything crashed down. The sight of Lily shivering by the cold glass wasn't just a discovery. It was an activation. The years of suppressing my instincts, the trauma of being the outsider, the fear of confrontation all vaporized under the sheer force of maternal fury. I didn't utter a word to Lily. I simply scooped her small, freezing body into my arms, the coldness of her skin sending a jolt of shock through me. I wrapped her tightly in the heavy cardigan I was wearing. My hands were steady, now driven by a primal need. My facial expression must have been terrifyingly blank. All emotion had funneled into singular, deadly purpose. I carried her not back into the unheated porch, but straight into the blazing heart of the parlor, where the kindreds and my son were basking in their self-satisfied warmth. The transition from the dark, cold periphery to the bright, laughing center was jarring. I stood there holding Lily, who burrowed her pale face into my shoulder, still faintly trembling. The sound of their laughter died immediately, replaced by a sudden confused silence. 15 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me, focusing instantly on the sight of the bundled child and my rigid accusing presence. Evelyn Kindred was the first to speak, annoyance clear in her perfectly modulated voice. "Margaret, dear, what is the meaning of this? You're interrupting Father's story." I didn't look at Evelyn. My gaze was locked solely on my son, Ethan, who was standing by the mantelpiece, cider in hand. His expression shifted from confusion to a panicked shame as he realized what I had seen. "Ethan," I said, my voice low and dangerous, utterly stripped of the nervous politeness he was accustomed to. Every single word was a hammer blow. "You told your 5-year-old adopted daughter to sit in the freezing dark because her joy was disrupting the flow of your wealthy in-law's laughter. Look at her. Look at her blue lips. Look at her shivering." Ethan stammered, his body tensing defensively. "Mom, she was being loud. She needed a timeout. It was just for a minute. I told her to." Before he could finish, I moved my gaze to Clara. Her face was already set in a practiced look of victimhood, ready to dismiss me. "And you, Clara?" I continued, ignoring Ethan entirely. "You sat here right next to the roaring fireplace, knowing she was freezing just outside that glass, and you let her stay there. This isn't just snobbery, Evelyn." I directed my voice back to the matriarch, who had started to rise from her armchair. "This is cruelty. This is calculated abuse of a vulnerable child." I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned to Lily, still clutched tightly to my chest. I looked directly at Ethan one last time. My eyes were not filled with tears, but with a horrifying clarity. "I am leaving now, Ethan, and I am taking Lily. You need to choose what you value more, the approval of these people or the safety of your daughter, because you cannot have both." With that, I walked out of the opulent, chillingly silent parlor, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The entire suffocating dynamic of years had just been shattered by the sound of a shivering child. I didn't stop until I reached the car, buckling Lily in the engine, running for heat. The feeling was a desolate mix of heartbroken grief for my son and fierce, unshakable resolution to protect my granddaughter at any cost. There was no going back. The war had begun. My actions following that devastating Christmas Eve were swift, methodical, and driven by the cold, hard logic of a mother protecting her young. I knew that the kindreds and Ethan would mobilize quickly to minimize the incident, so my priority was to establish legal fact and physical safety. This was not a negotiation. It was an extraction and fortification. The very first thing I did the moment I got Lily home was not just comfort her, but document her condition. I drove her straight to an urgent care clinic. My body was tense, but my focus was sharp. I insisted the attending physician document everything: the low core temperature, the visible shivering, the blue tinge to her lips, and the emotional distress. I explained the situation to the doctor, emphasizing the deliberate nature of the exposure. This created an official time-stamped medical record of the neglect, turning a family argument into documented evidence. My hands gripped the clipboard tightly as the doctor signed the report. This act gave me a sense of quiet vindication. On Christmas Day morning, while the kindreds were likely nursing their hangovers, I was on the phone with my longtime family lawyer. I recounted the entire incident, emphasizing Ethan's complicity and the systemic emotional neglect Lily had endured within that environment. We immediately filed an emergency temporary custody petition based on the documented emotional and physical neglect. The argument was simple. Ethan had failed his parental duty to protect Lily from a demonstrably dangerous environment. The lawyer moved quickly, using the medical documentation as proof of imminent harm. This decisive move brought me a chilling but necessary satisfaction. Later that day, Ethan finally called his voice a mix of furious defensiveness and underlying panic. He saw this as a massive inconvenience and an overreaction. "Mom, you absolutely humiliated me. You ruined Christmas. Bring Lily back now." "This is kidnapping," he demanded, his voice strained. I let him finish. My emotion was entirely controlled, a complete absence of warmth. "Ethan, you told your 5-year-old daughter to freeze in the dark while you laughed by the fire. That is not an overreaction. It is a clinical assessment. I have the doctor's report, and I have filed for temporary emergency custody. You will be served tomorrow." His bluster immediately crumbled into shock. "Custody, Mom? You can't be serious." "I am perfectly serious." I stated, my gaze distant and cold, even over the phone. "This is no longer about my feelings, Ethan. This is about Lily's safety. When you prioritize the approval of your wife's family over your child's well-being, you forfeit your right to decide what is best for her. You need to get your own legal counsel." I hung up my hand steady. The reaction I felt was not joy, but a deep sorrowful resolve. I knew the fallout would be immense, but I had secured the legal high ground, and more importantly, I had secured Lily. I felt a tremendous sense of justice building. The war was officially on, and I had fired the first most powerful shot. The emergency custody petition hit Ethan and Clara like a physical blow. Their initial response wasn't remorse, but a furious, entitled defense designed to discredit me. They launched a brutal counterattack, exploiting my history and my love for Lily. Clara took to social media and contacted shared acquaintances, painting me as an obsessed, grieving widow who couldn't let go of her son and was trying to separate Lily from her real parents. Her face in the photos she posted was tearful, projecting the perfect image of a heartbroken mother. The narrative was that I had staged the freezing incident out of delusion and a desperate need to control their family. The irony of her projecting emotional instability onto me, the retired principal, was infuriating. My emotions were a steady simmer of cold anger, refusing to let their lies destabilize me. Ethan's lawyer immediately countered, filing a motion to dismiss the custody claim and threatening a countersuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and alienation of affection. They used Ethan's adoption of Lily against me, arguing that as the legal father, he had the absolute right to discipline her, and my interference was an unwarranted intrusion. They claimed my house was too small, too old, and that my financial resources, my modest principal's pension, were inferior to the kindred's wealth, arguing Lily's best interests lay with the money. The most painful maneuver was bringing up Lily's past. They alleged that I was emotionally manipulating Lily, exploiting her sensitive nature and her biological mother's abandonment issues to turn her against Ethan and Clara. They tried to claim that my intense bond with Lily was unhealthy and overly possessive. This accusation struck deep, as my love for Lily was genuine and protective. My body language became defensive, my hands often clenching into fists as I listened to my lawyer relay these cruel accusations. Ethan called me once, his voice full of calculated menace. "Mom, you will lose. They have better lawyers, more money, and they know people. Drop the custody suit, or I promise you'll never see Lily again, and you'll be buried in legal fees." In that moment, I looked at Lily, who was sitting quietly drawing a picture of our old warm house. I saw the fear in her occasional glance towards the door. The kindred's relentless cold tactics only solidified my resolve. Their response wasn't an olive branch. It was a declaration of war. My eyes hardened. They thought money and status could buy silence. They were about to learn that money is useless against a well-documented truth and a mother's protective fury. Ethan and Clara believed their wealth and legal threats would instantly crush me. They underestimated the meticulous planning of a retired principal who specialized in documenting evidence and maintaining an unassailable record. I was ready to present the unvarnished truth to the judge. The emergency hearing was the perfect crucible for the kindred's arrogance. They walked in radiating confidence. Evelyn Kindred was there perched in the front row, a silent judgmental observer whose expensive suit screamed influence. Ethan sat next to Clara, wearing a facade of responsible fatherhood. My lawyer, Mr. Davidson, began by calmly addressing their claims of my emotional instability and the superior financial environment they offered. He didn't argue my merits. He dismantled their demerits. Fact 1. The medical report. Mr. Davidson presented the urgent care documentation. The doctor's notes detailed Lily's specific physiological responses to cold exposure. This was a clinical assessment, not grandmotherly hysteria. The report established that the child was indeed subjected to conditions that constituted neglect, turning Ethan's time out into a documented health risk. Ethan's face paled slightly as the judge reviewed the document. This was evidence he couldn't dismiss as gossip fouactu. The deposition from the nanny. This was my ace in the hole, and I had anticipated they would try to minimize the pattern of neglect. Mr. Davidson introduced a deposition from the kindred's former housekeeper nanny, who had witnessed countless incidents of emotional isolation and subtle cruelty towards Lily. She testified to Lily frequently being left alone in the unheated library while the family entertained. Evelyn openly calling Lily the charity case when talking to Clara. Ethan consistently ignoring Lily in favor of performing for his in-laws. The nanny's testimony was non-biased and focused on a long-term pattern, not just one isolated incident. This demolished the obsessed grandmother narrative. Clara's composure completely shattered. Her eyes darted furiously towards Evelyn, realizing the depth of the betrayal. Fact 3. The recorded conversation. This was the coup de grace. Knowing Ethan would threaten me, I had consulted my lawyer before his panic call and legally recorded the conversation where he threatened to bury me in legal fees and ensure I would never see Lily again if I didn't drop the suit. Mr. Davidson played the short clip. Ethan's calculated, vindictive voice filled the courtroom. It wasn't the voice of a loving father. It was the voice of a man prioritizing his ego and bank account over his child. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Evelyn Kindred's icy expression finally cracked into pure, unadulterated shock and fury. My emotions were a quiet, burning intensity. I maintained eye contact with the judge, offering a steady professional silence. The evidence was overwhelming. The documented physical neglect. The pattern of emotional abuse witnessed by an objective third party. And the father's own recorded threat to alienate the child. The judge granted me temporary full custody, pending a full psychological review of the family environment. I walked out of that courtroom with the custody order in my hands, not just an acquittal. I had secured Lily's safety and delivered justice against the cold, manipulative forces of the kindreds and my own deeply disappointing son. The surge of protective triumph was absolute. The judge's ruling granting me temporary full custody was the culmination of the most terrifying and vindicating week of my life. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was the decisive liberation of Lily from an environment that was slowly, subtly crushing her spirit. The immediate aftermath was defined by an immense restorative silence. The Kindred's sprawling, ostentatious house was replaced by the cozy, familiar warmth of my own home in Vermont. I watched Lily as she colored quietly at the kitchen table, her small body no longer tense or guarded. The constant scanning of her eyes, a nervous habit she had developed at the Kindred's, began to fade, replaced by the relaxed, focused concentration of a secure child. My own relief was physical. The tension that had tightened my shoulders for years finally unwound. I spent the next few days doing small, mundane things, reading Lily stories without interruption, baking cookies that actually smelled up the house, and simply sitting next to her sharing the quiet. This gentle return to normalcy was the true definition of victory. Ethan was enraged, but the temporary custody order held him at bay. Our communication was now strictly through lawyers, which suited me perfectly. However, the legal victory did not erase the grief over the loss of my son. He chose the Kindred's status and his own wounded ego over his daughter's well-being. The realization was a dull, heavy ache in my chest. I sat alone one evening holding the phone, my hand hovering over his contact number. My emotions were a complex mix of sorrow for the son I raised and steely resolve for the daughter I was saving. I realized that the boy I loved was still there somewhere, buried under layers of his wife's entitlement and his own emotional cowardice. But I couldn't save him. I could only save Lily. My focus shifted entirely to the present. I realized that my mistake had been seeking acceptance from the Kindreds when I should have been demanding respect. I had allowed my own trauma of being an outsider to dictate my actions, keeping me silent and complicit. My new life with Lily felt fundamentally right. I was no longer the polite, marginalized guest. I was the fierce matriarch, the primary caregiver, the stable foundation Lily desperately needed. My body language changed. I was more confident, my steps firmer. My eyes held a new, unshakable clarity. This victory was utterly deserved because it was earned not through manipulation or money, but through the courage to prioritize a child's safety over adult convenience and familial pretense. I stood up for the vulnerable child I once was embodied in Lily, and in doing so, I finally validated my own worth. I protected the innocent and established an absolute boundary. Cruelty will not be tolerated in my family regardless of wealth or relation. The freedom was profound, and the peace was total. The peace in my home was profound, but my mind was not yet at rest. The legal battle was won, but the cost, the permanent fracture with my son, was a wound that refused to close. I entered a difficult phase of intense self-scrutiny, wrestling with the guilt and the grief. Every night after tucking Lily into bed, I would sit in the quiet, the custody order heavy on my desk, and question myself. On one hand, my actions were unequivocally right. I saved Lily from emotional and physical neglect. A principal's duty is to protect children, and I simply extended that professional ethic to my personal life. I established a vital boundary against cruelty and entitlement. The feeling of resolve that accompanied this realization was strong. I knew I would do it again without hesitation. My head would nod firmly when I affirmed this. On the other hand, the grief was overwhelming. I had in effect removed Ethan from Lily's daily life. Even with his profound flaws, he was her father. Was there another way? Could I have forced him into therapy before the custody battle? I feared that my deep-seated trauma of being the outsider had perhaps fueled my reaction, pushing me to escalate the conflict to a legal war instead of trying mediation first. Did my desire for vindication blind me to a softer solution? This internal questioning brought an immense sense of failure as a mother. I had raised Ethan to be a strong, compassionate man, yet he had become a moral coward, prioritizing his wife's status over his child's health. The guilt was acute. Did my emotional distance after my husband's death push Ethan too far into the Kindred's sphere of influence? I would often stare out the window, my eyes distant, filled with the sorrow of that lost connection. The internal conflict was simple. Do I sacrifice my son's relationship with his daughter to ensure her safety? Or do I compromise her safety for the sake of an appearance of family unity? The answer was always Lily's safety. But the path to that answer was paved with a maternal heartbreak. I had won the war, but I had lost the peace of mind that comes with an intact family. I realized that my own emotional growth depended on accepting that I could be a good protective grandmother without having a perfect, happy family. That acceptance was the hardest step of all. The painful self-reflection was the final necessary hurdle. It led me to a place of quiet, mature resolution. I realized that true growth wasn't about repairing the relationship with Ethan immediately, but about fundamentally changing my approach to life and parenting, thereby establishing an environment that demands respect. What I learned, the most profound lesson, was recognizing how my own fear of abandonment had driven my past behavior. I allowed the kindred's condescension and Ethan's neglect because I was desperate to maintain the idea of a whole family for Lily, and I was terrified of being truly alone. I learned that silence in the face of cruelty is complicity, and that love without respect is manipulation. My growth centered on redefining my self-worth. I am not worthy because my son needs me or because the kindreds accept me. I am worthy because I am Margaret Dubois, a strong, capable woman who stood up for what is right. This realization brought an incredible sense of inner peace. My body language became less rigid, and my face now holds a genuine, calm smile, not the tight, anxious facade I used to wear. I learned that the best thing I could give Lily was not a perfect family, but a perfectly safe and honest environment. What I decided to do to improve the relationship. The improvement I sought was not reconciliation, but establishing boundaries for responsible co-parenting. I decided on a clear long-term strategy: strict legal communication. All contact regarding Lily must go through the legal teams or be documented via a court-approved communication app. No personal, emotional, or spontaneous calls. Therapy mandate. Any future movement toward shared custody would be contingent upon Ethan completing mandatory counseling, focusing on anger management and parental responsibility. Supervised visits only. For the foreseeable future, Ethan's visits with Lily would be supervised by a neutral third party to ensure Lily's emotional safety and prevent parental alienation. I focused on creating an unassailable foundation for Lily. We started therapy together, not because she was broken, but to process the confusing chaos she had endured. My hands were now busy, tending to our garden, a symbol of nurturing growth in a secure space. The feeling was one of a controlled purpose, the flaw in my decision-making. I also acknowledged a major flaw in my past decision-making. I prioritized public appearance over private accountability. I used to be so concerned with projecting the image of a good mother and maintaining the family facade that I failed to confront Ethan's immaturity early on. I paid for his mistakes, excused his failings, and allowed him to treat me as an ATM and an emotional cleaner-upper, particularly when it came to his in-laws. My critical mistake was believing that money and enabling could substitute for holding him accountable. When I finally drew the line at the kindred's house, it felt like an overnight betrayal to him, not the inevitable consequence of years of neglected boundaries. I realized I had inadvertently fueled his sense of entitlement, making him incapable of handling the slightest inconvenience, like my unsalted food in the previous story, or his daughter being too loud in this one. My gaze dropped with genuine regret. When I accepted this truth, I was an enabler, first, a defender, second. Acknowledging this flaw was the key to ensuring I raised Lily to be resilient and emotionally honest, not entitled. Sitting here now with Lily safe and sound, I realize my story is not unique. Many of you watching in America are caught between the love for your children and the necessity of protecting your own peace, or worse, the safety of your grandchildren. My message today is delivered with the firm resolve of a woman who almost lost everything to save one small shivering soul. The first crucial lesson: watch out for the subtle, sophisticated cruelty. The kindreds didn't yell or strike. They used silence, exclusion, and social hierarchy to inflict pain. This kind of abuse is often harder to fight because it hides behind good manners and wealth. When I saw Lily shivering, it wasn't just a child being cold. It was the physical manifestation of their emotional coldness towards anyone not in their circle. I urge you to trust your instincts. If a social situation, a holiday gathering, a family dinner, makes you feel anxious, invisible, or if you see a child being marginalized, that is a red flag. Do not prioritize the appearance of family harmony over the reality of emotional safety. The flow that my son protected was just the smooth flow of self-congratulation, and it was toxic. The moment you see a loved one, especially a child, being treated as less than, you must speak up. Do not wait for the freezing point. My hands were busy sewing a dollhouse, a gesture of love while I should have been setting clear rules, a gesture of respect. The second lesson: sometimes love requires legal war. I had to move beyond the fear of confrontation and accept that the only language the kindreds and Ethan understood was the language of law and consequences. I had the medical documentation, the neutral testimony, and the proof of their pattern. Many grandparents fear losing access to their grandchildren if they challenge the parents. But I ask you, what good is access if the child is suffering? I made the excruciating decision to place Lily's safety above my relationship with Ethan. That decision required immense courage, not anger. I used facts, not emotion, to make my case. I knew that by fighting fiercely for her, I was teaching her a lesson no passive compliance ever could. You are worthy of being fought for. To anyone feeling trapped, research your legal options. Sometimes the only way to establish peace is to use the strongest boundary available. Finally, my message is about redefining family. My traditional view of family, which kept me trapped in the kindred's drawing room, almost destroyed Lily. Family is not defined by blood marriage or mandatory holiday attendance. Family is defined by safety, mutual respect, and consistent love. I may have lost the nuclear family I knew, but I gained a truly healthy one with Lily. We built our own small, warm tradition. I learned that being a successful parent or grandparent means accepting that your adult children might choose a path that hurts you, and you must choose your own self-respect and the safety of the next generation. My gaze is now focused forward on nurturing the sensitive, artistic spirit of my granddaughter. I am free from the kindred's judgment and my son's disappointment. Your life, your home, and your time are yours. Choose to fill them with genuine warmth, not performative cheer. Choose safety over silence. So that is the story of the shivering child by the fireplace and the legal war that followed. I found my daughter in the cold and decided that my politeness, my fear, and my old life had to burn away in the face of true injustice. If my journey from the worried mother-in-law, trying to fit into the woman who used the law to protect her grandchild, resonated with your own struggles against entitlement or neglect, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message about boundaries and courage. It's easy to look at the kindreds and feel anger, but I urge you to look closer to home. Are you allowing a subtle form of cruelty to continue because you fear the fallout? I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below and tell me. What was the moment you realized you had to stop being polite and start being protective in your own family dynamic? What was the shivering by the fireplace moment for you? I'll be reading and responding to your stories. And finally, subscribe to my channel. This is Margaret Dubois, and this is the story of my new life with Lily. Join me next time when I discuss the unexpected relief of spending my first Christmas alone and free. Thank you for watching. And remember, your peace is worth the price of a difficult conversation.